to all of you across the country, and I would like to welcome you to the Benefits Alliance Group Keynote Speaker Series. My name is Mike McCowan, and as the president of the Benefits Alliance Group, I'm so excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Rob Catalano. Our Keynote Speaker Series are focused on highlighting the challenges and issues facing employers across the country. We are so excited to participate on this thoughtful content with all of our advisor firms from across our nation. Over the past year, organizations of all sizes have faced the challenges and uncertainty of our current new normal. For many employers, the ability to engage, respond, and understand your team has become increasingly more difficult, especially at a time when employees matter more now than ever. Our planning committee of advisors was so excited to have Rob present, as he combines that unique quality of offering insight about thought leadership on employee engagement and practical recommendations on how to manage given uncertainty in the workplace. A bit about Rob, our speaker. Rob is the Chief Engagement Officer at WorkTango and has spent the last 18 years consulting companies on employee engagement while building HR technology and advisory companies. He is active in Engage for Success movement, focusing on raising the profile of the impact of employee engagement on employees and business success. And he was named one of the 100 top global employee engagement influencers in 2020. In addition, Rob and his team at WorkTango were recently nominated for 2 HR Reporters Reader's Choice Awards. So let's give Rob some love. Let's check out the website and remember to vote. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the chat function, and I will be asking a handful of them as time permits at the end. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So I encourage you, if you have questions that you think are important to you and your employees, remember to ask. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome Rob Catalano. I'll be back at the later to ask Rob some questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for the introduction. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here in general, and thanks for everyone that joined today. Look forward to spending the next hour with you. And the goal is to share some best practices, share some of my experiences, and dive into questions at the end. So definitely get those in, and Mike can provide those to me. But I'm really excited to talk about this topic. Maintaining employee engagement in uncertain and remote times. And who would have thought we'd be a year into this, right? And things have changed so much. I know personally, I've done way less travel, sports, and shaving than I've ever done in my life. But I've done a lot more of TV binge watching, Zoom meetings like this than I've ever wanted to. But things have changed. And I think it's an important topic now more than ever, because especially for a lot of us, we're engaging teams in a new environment, right? And this experience isn't just new for us as business leaders, HR leaders, but all employees and organizations. So before I get started, I want to kind of just give a bit more context and introduction in terms of my experience and background. But again, thanks for that introduction. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at a company I founded a number of years back called WorkTango. And what we do is we actually measure engagement. We understand and help companies not only measure it, but understand diagnostics around what's working in an organization. And obviously 2020 was a big year where people were trying to navigate through change. And I also spend the time on a couple of other alliances and communities, which focuses on helping really bring engagement to the forefront. So if you haven't figured it out already, super passionate about this space. And my goal is to bring this wisdom of crowds approach, right? All the things I've learned, all the companies I get the pleasure of working with, to share all that information with you. But I do want to obviously get some of your questions asked. So hopefully we get to those at the end. Also, if you're wondering what that thing at the top is, that's a Bitmoji. If you don't know what it is, don't worry. I didn't know what that was, not too long ago. But I have 2 nieces where I can only communicate through, with them through Bitmojis. It used to be the emoticons back in the day, and little, videos, and now it's Bitmojis. So it's interesting, even though how I'm communicating with my own flesh and blood, is changing. We're also changing our approaches in the workplace as well. So, before getting started, I wanted to kind of set the table and tone for today's discussion. And I always like to share this image. And this image is the best way that I can illustrate what a lot of people are feeling right now, right? What I call this wave of uncertainty, whether it's uncertainty in the office, whether it's the pandemic, right? Whether it's personal issues that are stemming from the pandemic. Let's be honest, it was like this last March, and it's this March, I think it's the same, right? It's this compounding uncertainty that's happening for our employee base. And again, like it's not going away, right? There's still uncertainty on when we go to back to work and the vaccine process and stress around all of our changing lifestyles. What's interesting is when we hear this wave of uncertainty in the media, we hear things about, the markets are crashing or stores are closing. And what I really want to talk about today are all the things that make these things tick, right? The stores, the businesses, the markets, and it's really around what about employees. Now, by the way, when you search up employees on Google, this is the first image that comes up. I don't know about you, but this is exactly how my team looks, right? Just like yours. I thought it was a funny image there. But what's interesting when we talk about employees is I want to tell you a bit of a story about Worktango. Now, Worktango, we're a small business, and every single week we ask employees a question: how do you feel about work this week? Right? We measure their engagement on a weekly basis. This is what we do for our customers. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's yearly, maybe it's every month, whatever works based on different cultures. But when we measure this, up into those three bars, right before the pandemic hit in March 12th, 2020, we had 100% positive sentiment on this question. And then the pandemic hit and things changed. Employee morale went down. We started seeing negative items here. And I can tell you that a year later, we still haven't got to that point where we're at 100% of all green. And that scares me as a business leader, right? In terms of making sure we're building an environment where employees are engaged, where they feel positive about their work experience. Now, that being said, I mean, this could be influenced by work. It could be influenced by what's happening externally, but really important for us to put this under the microscope. And I tell you the Worktango story in this, one instance. But when you actually look at, all the data that we get to collect from our customers, we're seeing changes, year over year. So for example, when we look at Q1 in 2020 versus Q1 in 2021, we're seeing holistically engagement levels going down dramatically. We're seeing communication scores and how people are responding to those comments in employee feedback surveys low as well. We're seeing outlook on the organization being low as well at 41%. So again, it's not that immediate thing. It's something that's happening across the board in a lot of organizations. And when I see these numbers, this is what I think about. Now, I don't know how many of you are doing the same amount of Netflix binge watching that I am, but if you don't know what this image is or what it's called, it's actually from the episode Stranger Things, or the series Stranger Things on Netflix, and it's a place called the Upside Down. It's this alternate universe, right? Now, I liken this world of remote work and some uncertainty around us as not an alternate universe, but this is real, right? This is actually what we're living every single day in our workplaces. And let's be honest, it's not changing, right? This is our reality. Like, this is what our workforce is looking like. This is what I'm sure all of you look like at the other end of that screen. I hope you're all way more engaged than the people here. But again, this is our reality, right? And the immediate future is going to look like this remote workplace, a lot of uncertainty in when we're getting back. And I don't know about you, but we shut down our Toronto and Ottawa office. We had a lot of people in other countries around the world, and we're still managing to do this remotely. But I don't know when we're going to send our team back to the office in 2020. I don't know if it will even be 2020. To be honest, I don't want to be first to market on that. But the idea is we're going to have to consider this level of uncertainty in remote work and how we engage employees above and beyond, today. And if you want any, evidence on that, and Gartner did a really good study in December, so a couple of months ago, that showed out of the changes you've made because of COVID, which do you expect to keep in place after vaccines are widely adopted? And what you see at the top there, 90% are allowing employees to work remotely at least part of the time. And you're seeing it all over the media, right? In terms of companies saying work from anywhere and those types of things happening. And the workplace is changing. I think it's going to be more of an expectation. So I wanted to set the table up and kind of talk about the state of engagement, the state of the world, the state of uncertainty in the remote world that we're in, and really focus on talking about these items today. The first is I want to talk about the impact of uncertainty, right? And why it really matters in the workplace. Then I want to get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation today, which are 5 approaches for leaders to maintain employee engagement in uncertain times, right? And remote environments. And again, you might be the head of your organization. You might be the head of HR. You might be a leader. I think all these concepts are very, very relatable to everyone. But what I want to end with is kind of putting people in the right mindset. What are 4 mindsets that you need to start with? And in all these conversations, I'm going to sprinkle in some examples to really try to inspire thought, inspire action at the end of the day. Now, before getting into the 5 approaches and some of those details, the question I always like to ask when I'm ask myself when I'm conducting these types of presentations is, who cares? By the way, if you search "who cares" in Google, this is the first image that comes up. Google is an amazing tool; it does really cool things. This is one of them. Um, but why you should care? Now, first off, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, talking about why engagement's important. I assume people understand that. But I do want to kind of level set in case some people need convincing. And briefly, what I wanted to share was, at the end of the day, employee engagement matters. If you don't believe me, profitability is 5 times higher. Sales are 2.5 times higher with engaged workplaces. Again, I can go through the list here. I'm not going to do it. You can read this or get the slides later. And what's interesting is, one of the communities I'm a part of was when I was in the UK, called Engage for Success. And it was actually created by the UK government to identify, they're one of the lower nations when it comes to employee engagement. So they put effort, budget, people into the idea of really providing the evidence around why this is important. And I have the pleasure of working with that group. So there is a lot of evidence out there. Now, if you're one of those people where your eyes glaze over when it comes to numbers and metrics, and maybe you're not a believer in the numbers, I like to describe engagement with the alternate of it, which is disengagement. So if I want to describe disengagement, it's typically this picture. So this is another reason why you should care, right? This is not what we want our employees doing day in and day out. Now, the other reason why I think it's really important that we care before getting into the items is that it's it's hard to engage employees in general. But when people are going through change, it's even more important and heightened. Because look how change starts impacting employees, right? They start off at denial, right? When change is happening around us, they get into realization, they get into resistance and anger, right? Then they let go. And that's when sometimes retention is an issue. And then eventually they search, they understand the meaning, right? And the changes are starting to get internalized. And certainly your employees are going through some level of this right now. Maybe you're going through some level of this right now. But this change around us, it just adds layers of uncertainty to us and really impacts the engagement of employees. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is meant to identify how to engage employees through uncertainty, through change, and through this environment we find ourselves in. So that being said, I want to dive right into the major component, which is 5 approaches to engage employees in these uncertain and remote times. So we'll dive in. The first one, there is no such thing as over communicating. And if you're Office fans, you're really going to like some of the slides today. If you're not, that's okay. But this sounds like a basic one, and I'm going to go through some of the details here and more specifically. But when there's uncertainty, when there's change, when there's a remote environment, you need to bolster communication in your organization. Maybe you have to use different vehicles that you had before, or you have to be creative because getting people in a room and celebrating, together isn't an option anymore. So I want to share some kind of tactical concepts and ways that you can focus on this over communication and why they're important. So in this first pillar, let's walk through that. Some key points. First, be honest and transparent. If transparency or authenticity isn't in your company values today, I think now the time is to really embrace them and exemplify them with every decision that you make. And I can't overemphasize how important this is. Again, I can talk about this and use data for hours, but really good research from Neuro Leadership Institute. If you're interested in this type of insight, definitely check them out. But management transparency is the most significant predictor of employee happiness. Leaders are seen as more trustworthy and more effective. Because again, when you see things clearly from an employee perspective, when you know the state of the universe, that boosts engagement, that boosts performance, right? When you have secrecy in the company or people don't know where they stand, that erodes trust. So it's really important to be honest and transparent, and it's okay because sometimes the message isn't that great, right? But again, that vulnerability, that empathy that comes with it, employees kind of understand when you start explaining what's happening in the company, even if it's not the best news. Now, the other kind of flip to that is that being honest and transparent isn't enough. Just telling your team that we have to lose resources or we can't add headcount or things are changing, that's transparency, but it doesn't offer them the why, right? You can't stop at what. You have to really identify why things are happening or why decisions are being made. And I always love the innocence of a child, right? Asking repeatedly, like, why? Why is this happening? And again, telling your company that, what is happening, again, that doesn't really support that uncertainty. Maybe you are letting talent go. Maybe the metrics are, and there's reasons behind this, but you have to give a good answer to why this is happening. And again, I'm not talking about why is this philosophical abstraction, right? It's an explanation of why it has cognitive impact. As real world functions, it promotes learning, it promotes discovery, and it's vital to smoothly navigating an environment, right? Why gives context. When people understand the why, then they can relate to, why the decision was made. They may not like it, but that context is really important. So again, I urge people when they're thinking about communicating to your team, especially when things are changing, honest and transparency in what and why is really important. Now, when I talk to HR leaders in organizations, they think that they have one and two down and they're all good. But the reality is communication is two-way, right? You have to have other concepts of having a conversation so people are involved in communication, right? Communication isn't just a one-way thing. And some points to help you in this kind of journey, whether you're talking to a team, a whole company. There's 3 points I wanted to make. First is promote dialogue to build understanding. And what I mean by promoting dialogue is simple. This is what I do with my team every single week. Whether it's confidentially on a pulse we send out, or it's actually live on a daily meeting we have with our whole team, we have a question that says, ask the leaders. Ask them anything, right? We will happily be transparent and tell you what the answer is. If we don't know the answer, we'll tell you we don't know, right? And just that idea of promoting dialogue, saying, listen, we want you to ask questions. We want you to give us what's on your mind, because maybe our explanation of what or why earlier wasn't sufficient enough or wasn't clear enough, right? You provide this ability to have them to get understanding, right? This dialogue allows them to follow up and understand what's happening. And I know it's a small concept here, and number 1 and 2 and 3 seem to be basics, but you have to instill this into your conversations and your rhythm that you have in your employee communication. Now, it's not just the dialogue to build understanding, it's elevating employee listening. What's working for employees? What barriers can you remove, right? When you have that employee listening, that gives you much more context to be a better leader, a better HR leader, a better, company leader, whatever role that you play. And the other part about two-way dialogue is that, and what I find really helps drive employee engagement, especially in uncertain times when you're navigating through new things and you're all writing the book together, so to speak. There's no manual on how we approach all these, is adopting an inclusive approach to planning. Ask employees their recommendations. So, I talked about earlier what Worktango does. We help companies understand employee sentiment. But there's two types of employee voice. One is, satisfaction and dissatisfaction, right? Are you happy at work? Are you engaged at work? All the things and measures that go into that. But the second, and I think more important one, is what I call participative management. It's the context. Why do you think that? Or why are you dissatisfied? What would you recommend? And the idea here is an inclusive approach to planning is you as a business leader, HR leader, anyone, you're going to have to, conduct changes and navigate through this. Why not include them in the planning? Right? Don't just listen to their voice and measure. Try to have that inclusive approach and participative management. That is engaging to employees, right? They're involved in decisions and impact things versus, again, being helpless or in the dark or things just happening to them. So again, these three again seem to be standard, but when you really break it down and look at your communication patterns, give it some thought in terms of how you can upgrade that for your teams. It definitely adds context and builds engagement with individuals and teams. Now, the fourth key point kind of gets into our current environment of remote work. And one thing that's kind of proven to be very engaging in terms of communication is creating opportunity for remote social interaction. Because let's be honest, this is a little harder to do, right? The water cooler chat, just kind of having an open conversation randomly in the office. So one of the most essential steps that you can take is structure ways for employees to interact socially. What I mean by that is, can you have informal conversations around non-work topics, right, while you're working remotely? And I've seen some easy ways to do this and to establish this kind of, social interaction is a simple way. Maybe leave time at the beginning of each call for non-work items. Hey, it's starting at 11. We're going to get started at 11:10. If you want to come in early, chat with your colleagues, it's a really good way to promote that, or leave some time at the end, right? You know, catch up with people. Another, way I've seen companies do this or leaders do this is that concept of, whether it's, opening virtual care packages, or, hey, everyone's getting $25 to be able to add something to the remote home environment. We're actually going to share that with each other all at the same time. It gives you a reason to have a more social conversation versus just, kind of navigate through home and work at the same time. And I know, while these events sound artificial or forced, there's actually reports that these virtual kind of conversations are helping reduce feelings of isolation, right? It's promoting a sense of belonging, at the end of the day, improving engagement. So that'd be one thing I'd urge people to do. Great opportunity for this remote social interaction, given the space we're in. And a lot of people feel isolated today. So it's a welcome change to their world of always being on the hamster wheel, having to be on meetings, versus I'm choosing to be here and interact in different ways. And the fifth on this concept of communication is establish rules of engagement. Remote work becomes way more satisfying when managers set expectation, whether it's the frequency, the means of communication, the ideal timing of communication. For example, we use video conferencing for daily check-ins, but use instant messenger when something's urgent. So one thing I thought might be helpful is, if you ask yourself your remote work playbook, right? Do you have strict working hours, right? That people can access your leaders or yourself whenever they want, right? Or is there a cadence of meetings that you have to bring up those conversations? So we eliminate the interruptions happening on, instant messenger. What communication channels do you use for different processes? Maybe for different purposes, how do you build rules of engagement around how people should communicate? Or, an extension of that is troubleshooting. Who do employees turn to help when they have issues? How do they reach out? So I find this kind of, rules of engagement aligns people. They're not lost. They're not uncertain in terms of how things are working in an environment that they may not be used to, right? And things change, and it's okay to reestablish those rules of engagement. It's okay to build a dialogue around what's working for people and what's not, and be agile in changing those up. But again, a really big pillar is this concept of communication and over communication at these times. Now, I always like to have a little bit of fun. This is really hard to do, when it's remote and I can't see you. I can't see anyone's video, and hopefully you all humor me. But I want to do this quick exercise that I think will put you in the right frame of mind if you do participate in it. And for anyone who knows the people at the bottom, Hal Johnson, Joanne McLeod, this is very nostalgic for me, and I'm excited to put them into my presentations any way I can. But I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise with everyone, and I'm hoping you can all take a pen and a paper and take 5 seconds to pull that up in front of you. And what we're going to do while you're pulling that pen and paper is I actually want to go through, I'm going to give you 6 simple instructions, right? Something that you're going to actually draw onto your piece of paper. And they're going to be 6. They're not hard. They're pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. But if you participate in this, you're going to kind of realize something that's going to help you in your communication with, again, your team, your employees, your direct reports, even other folks as well. So first things first, draw a small circle near the top of the page. All right, simple. Second instruction, draw a single vertical line from the circle to the middle of the page. Straightforward. Number 3, draw 2 vertical lines from the circle, angled down toward the middle of the page. So you got 2 lines this time. Give you another second. All right, number 4, draw 2 lines separating from the single vertical line, each of which angles down toward the bottom of the page. Like 2 lines still, but maybe a couple more details there to think about. 5th, at the end of the angled line stemming from the circle, draw small 5 lines. And the last one, at the end of the angled line stemming from the vertical line, draw an oval at the base of each line. Now, it's hard to see what you have in front of you, but what your picture should look like is this. Now, when I did this, and this was done to me, Mine looked nothing like this, like not even remotely close. It looked like some Picasso thing that, I could say was abstract art. It wasn't even close to it. But what this exercise really tells us, it's hard to give clear instructions, whether that's just communication day in and day out with your team or feedback that you're giving them. So you have to have empathy for the listener, right? Think about the listener when you're communicating what's happening. If they don't have the why, right? It's easy to get misunderstood. It's easy to misinterpret it. Is your message clear? And those instructions I gave you were really clear, right? But again, in context, it was really tough for this to be the output. And again, is there a channel for that feedback to ask questions? So a lot of these things, when it comes to communication, it's required to engage people in this environment. So key reminder, really, you can't over communicate, and feel free to use that exercise with your team if they're not here, because it's a real it kind of challenges your mind to understand that how we communicate, is there better ways to improve that. Now, that's the first major pillar. The second is, engaging employees in these uncertain times requires a continuous feedback structure. And structure is the key word there. And it's so critical if you want to build better communication and better engagement. And I always use this example, right, of sports. I have two nieces, they play soccer. I can only imagine that, let's say they got feedback at the end of the soccer season, and that was the only time they got feedback. They're probably not going to turn into good soccer players, right? And my brother's money that he spent on it probably isn't going to anything that they're going to learn or pick up from a skill perspective. However, this is how we give feedback in many of our organizations. We wait to the end of the year to give them a performance appraisal or something like that. But think about professional sports, right? Using sports as the analogy, right? I'm in Toronto right now, if you can't tell by the giant cranes beside me, but the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm a big fan. But the coach, Sheldon Keefe, doesn't give feedback at the end of the playoffs or the end of the regular season or the end of each period. It's every shift, every play, every pass, right? So if we think about this continuous feedback structure, that's important to align and engage your workforce, because at the end of the day, people think success looks like this, but it really looks like this. Work is not sequential. So ask yourself, is there a feedback structure set up in your organizations or your teams that allows this to happen? And when I talk about structure, what I mean is, are you doing things on a daily, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, to make sure that there's some level of feedback and structured communication that's happening? Again, whether it's an individual, whether it's a team, no one can just walk up to you anymore and ask you a certain question, right? Or to you as a leader or any colleague, right? So this structure allows and builds that ability to have conversations. Really good example, daily meetings in our whole organization. Right? We have a structure that makes it easy for us to do certain things, which I'll explain in the next slide. Weekly, we have updates from certain departments, so we know accountability on what those goals are looking like. Monthly, we get into more specific monthly departmental goals and highlight those and build accountability on it. And quarterly, that's when we get into quarterly organizational goals and build accountability on that. And the structured feedback rhythm helps you in a couple of ways. One is it aligns more frequently, right? I mean, it's ideal to have everyone on the same page in uncertain times, right? And again, when you align people on following up on whether it's goal setting, expectations, those types of things, that alignment is ideal. But that alignment, when you start having more frequent structured conversations, you can course correct quickly. I mean, how many of you have conducted the annual performance review or looked at the goals and realized in the system that they're not even relevant anymore, right? We put in a goal and we don't talk about it for 364 days. That's not a good structure to build accountability and align more frequently. And that's what the third point I was mentioning, right? When you have that level of check-in that's happening, again, there is accountability to act, to do something different. And this is critical, especially when you don't have those informal chats happening in an organization. And just a few examples of things I've personally used. And again, and I'm talking in small teams, I'm talking in large teams, for example, huddles. I'd love to be able to see how many people raise their hand. And unfortunately, I can't in a virtual environment. But, for the last 15 years, I have done daily meetings with the whole company. That company's been 5 people, it's been 400 people every single day. And what it does, it bolsters communication. It reinforces the commitments we just talked about. It gives you the ability to escalate issues. We have what we call every day our tango minute. Tales from work tango, appreciation, gratitude, and then the O is actually for oh crap. And what it is anyone can raise their hand at any time, because everyone's in one place at least once a day for, 10 minutes and say, I have a no crap or I have a red flag. I need to talk to these three people before it's hard to get a hold of them in a remote environment. And again, these issues can get escalated much more frequently if you have that structured communication path and that structured feedback rhythm. And the last one, recognize and celebrate, right? It's, use that opportunity to share what great people are doing. We'll talk about that in a bit. Huddles is just one example. Another one are retrospectives. I've seen companies, sit down after a month and say, what worked well on this team or this company? What didn't work well? And more importantly, what do we need to do differently? Right? And again, think about what we talked about earlier on participative management. We're not asking employees to say, did you hit your goals or not? Say collectively as a team or an individual, what went well, what didn't? What are we going to do differently this time? Focusing on the future and in upskilling. And the last part, this is just an example I love and use it all the time. I R&D'd it from good to great. It's a concept called brutal facts. And by the way, when I say R&D, many people think research and development. We call it rip off and duplicate. It's okay to use concepts that exist in your organization. But what brutal facts is sitting, and I've done this for years, is sitting a team down every quarter and saying, what did not go well this quarter? What's a brutal fact? It can be confidential, it cannot, whatever it is, I take those insights and I put them all up on a board in a meeting and say, here are the themes that came out. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 30. Sometimes they're not great quarters. But the idea is that the company or your teams identify what the brutal facts are. You have all the themes up there and you get people to vote. Hey, what do you think are the top 1, 2, or 3 facts that you think we need to tackle this quarter that will be the most impactful to this team or company? And now they're part of the process, right? You have this curation of understanding of what the issues are you need to tackle first. And then you talk about those 2 or 3 issues and identify what are we going to do next steps to improve this in this quarter. It has all the elements of a structured feedback rhythm. Every quarter, we're going to sit down and discuss these. We're going to understand them. We're going to talk about what's going to happen next. And next quarter, we're going to be accountable to share what the changes were. So these are just examples I wanted to share in terms of structure and what I mean. And hopefully you can leverage these concepts for your individual employees, your teams, the company itself. And one kind of proof point on this concept of a structured feedback rhythm is the example of one-on-ones. Right? Employees and managers who do not have one-on-one meetings are 4 times likely to be disengaged. Right? I've had companies that we mandate one-on-ones, right? Mandate the conversations, the connection. Right? This level of connection is important in uncertain times in remote environments. The problem is, though, there can be bad one-on-ones. There can be bad check-ins, right? And check-ins doesn't mean just let's review your goals. Did you hit your goal or not? Why didn't you hit your goal? Your role is not to manage performance that way. It's to improve engagement, improve the conversations, to not just be an evaluator saying I'm checking in on your goals. It's how do you improve the employee's experience? That's engaging. And a couple of ways you can do that in your discussions is focus on the outcomes, not the activities, right? Hey, this is what success looks like. We've defined that, right? What's stopping you from getting there, right? What are the obstacles that need to be removed? Are there things in those activities that you need any support on, right? Or hey, this is from my experience, I've tried these activities, right? Here's some things that can work for you. So when you build these one-on-one conversations, not as a checkbox, but abilities to mentor more than manage employees, now this becomes a more engaging conversation. Right? I always say, are you a part-time evaluator or are you a full-time coach? Right? Which is especially if you're a leader of employees, it's really great to have. If you're in HR leading a company, right, having these expectations for your leaders is very, very important. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar, when it comes to how to engage employees in uncertain times, EQ wins over IQ, right? Emotional intelligence, wins over the intelligence quotient. Some would say this is important all the time, but I definitely think it's more important, especially during a crisis. Because think about it, right? Empathy, it's around seeing the world from the lens of someone else. Well, let's talk about the lens of employees today. Right? They lack any face-to-face conversation or supervision. Right? They lack access to the resources or information they had in the past, or they're learning a new process and how to do it. There's social isolation. right? There's distractions at home, right? So, we have to think about what's happening from their perspective before we can even, empathize with them or have any emotional intelligence around it. So one of the things I like to share as a major pillar through this time, whether it's yourself as HR leaders or or training leaders in your organization, is that how do we focus on emotional intelligence in our companies? So first, you really need to understand, right, in this equation of emotional intelligence, what are people going through? And I like to say something that you could take back on this is one way to reflect on understanding what people are going through is that there are three layers of uncertainty. There's uncertainty around the external environment, right? COVID, right? We don't know. Maybe there's things we don't know about our employees that maybe there was a death in the family. Maybe they can't go visit their loved one in a home. And again, we can't really understand this like unless we try and empathize with them, right? Organizationally, right? Changes like remote work, everything happening around us. Maybe individually, there's uncertainty around their current job role or status or things happening in their individual life. And what I think makes this situation so tough for organizations is many of our employees are going through all three of these things, right? And we need this emotional intelligence in organizations to help us get through it. So when I talk about understanding what employees are going through, right, it's understand with empathy. Listen and understand what's happening. Acknowledge and relate to what your employees are going through. Be genuine about it. And I'll use myself as an example. I do not have children. I don't know what it's like, but I have a colleague, Stephen, who has three beautiful girls, under the age of 6. I can't relate to what it's like. Like apparently, children that age have to eat and go to school and maybe stay home from school and do other things. So I can't really relate to it, but I can acknowledge it. I can try to empathize it, right? I can share that level of understanding of there's reasons why they can't be online all the time or those types of things. So I think understanding is just a big part of this. And what frustrates me is when I talk about empathy, I get whether it's leaders, HR leaders, CEOs, they roll their eyes. And the reality is that it does impact people, right? If you think empathy is fluffy or there's no impact on really caring about employees, they won't stay at your organization. 93% of employees say they're more likely to stay with an empathetic employer. And think about it, right? They're not going to help you in these tough times hit the goals that you have for your teams or organizations, right? So again, I always like to explain this in a way that can add color and more examples. And I know whether it's HR groups or many, you probably know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're new to this, it's basically a theory of human motivation, right? What needs do you have as a human being? At the bottom, physiological needs. I need food, water, shelter. I need safety needs. And until those base needs are met, it's really hard to get to the top. And I actually think there's new needs these days like Wi-Fi and battery and toilet paper, especially through COVID. But more seriously, right? There are some people's base needs that are not being met. Maybe they aren't, able to pay or worried about paying for their rent or food on the table. Maybe a partner had lost their position, or their job, right? Safety and security. Maybe they're unsure if they're going to have a job after all these changes that are happening and that fear around it. So this idea is that think about our employees that sometimes their base needs aren't even being met, and that's the state of our workplace right now. So again, we may be in our careers where we're at self-esteem and self-actualization, but again, a lot of people are suffering right now, and that empathy is really important. And another way I like to explain this is there's 4 pillars of wellness: mental, physical, social, financial. A lot of people are actually having challenges at all these levels all at the same time. You talk about that compounding uncertainty that we were talking about earlier, right? People are going through all the components of financial wellness and mental wellness, physical and social in these times. And again, the uncertainty around getting around it, everything to do with work, their personal lives, again, it really makes an impact on people, and we have to start empathizing with that. Now, another way you can kind of focus on emotional intelligence more than just understanding what employees are going through is double down on gratitude. Recognition is an intrinsic motivator. It costs you nothing to do as a business leader, as an HR leader, as a colleague, right? Remember, your staff is likely doing things that they weren't doing before, and recognition is a very, very simple way to be able to connect with someone. Again, and this is easy to institute in your structure we talked about earlier. If it's your weekly meeting, have a section for recognition. We do it every Monday, right? What do you want to recognize people for? How do you tie it to the values? How to amplify things that are happening in the company and share those positive moments? So double down on gratitude is a really good way to, an easy way and a no cost way, especially for small organizations, to focus on this emotional intelligence. And another way that you can is how do you connect on a deeper sense of purpose? So maybe it's rallying around your corporate values or a purpose that you have in your organization. I'll use Worktango as another example, right? A real example. So last year at this time, COVID hit, and the majority of our buyers are people in HR. Right? They want to leverage our technology, right, to understand employee sentiment, measure engagement, those types of things. But when COVID hit, the world kind of stopped for us. All the contracts what we had went dark. All the demos that we used to do as an early indicator of success, of our platform weren't happening. And you're weeks into this, and as a business leader, I'm scared, right? I was like, well, what's going on here? And obviously, our HR buyer had other things to worry about. So we changed our approach as a company. We said, listen, we're not going to sell anymore. We're not going to market Worktango and our technology. We're going to educate. And I don't know if people can see, but my T-shirt, it says "Improve Work Lives." And at Worktango, we call that our passion statement. We don't have a mission statement because we believe missions end. And our passion statement is to improve work lives. But work is in parentheses, right? Because we spend a lot of our waking time at work. But when we rallied around that purpose to say, listen, we're not here to grow our business today, right? Our community needs us. Let's find speakers to provide webinars. Let's write as many blogs as we can. Let's do what we can to help people navigate through this world of remote work. And we ended up having a fantastic year. We doubled our headcount. We did a lot of great things. But if there's a way to connect on that deeper sense of purpose, it's a really good way to focus on that emotional intelligence, and it is engaging at the end of the day. The last one is just try to enhance focus on engagement to include well-being of employees. We already talked about the issues people are having, but think about their physical workplace. Is there anything that you can do from a resource perspective to help them? Their mental wellness. Remember, you're going to need these folks to come back and work as normal again, or as normal as it becomes. That mental health is important for them to bounce back. You have to be flexible, right? I always say you have to increase employees' sense of control over their actions and their work schedule in these uncertain times, right? They might be dealing with other things. And the other part about that well-being is check in and stay connected, right? We were talking about that structure, that being checked on, that connectedness done in the right way, again, really supports people in these times. So that was the third one. Fourth, using consumer principles. So I talk about using consumer principles, what do you mean? What does this look like? But, at the end of the day, this is what an employee looks like. This is what a human looks like, whether they're an employee or a customer, right? People want things right away. And we make all these decisions about our customers. How do we engage them? How do we listen to them? How do we, the loyalty programs, how do we service and support our customers so they never leave? But in your organization, if you can use the same concepts on the talent side, you can definitely see a lot of success. And what's interesting is that think about how we do things for our customers, our financials, right? We don't look at these data once a year, yet we have practices and things with our employees once a year that may not be moving the needle. And the last thing, in terms of the major pillar I want to talk about, was leaders are your secret weapon in this whole equation, right? Leaders have huge impact on what happens in your organization. Actually, what's interesting, when you talk about leaders having huge impact, I did an exercise once where I had about 300 people in the room and I said, who has the biggest impact on your life? Who can define a good day or a bad day? And they listed them all down, and 3.5 was the ranking of your leader. Like, think about it. Yes, you have your partner and children and parents, but they're around there, right? So leaders have huge impact in an organization. So the point I want to make here is that this isn't an HR issue. This is something where leaders need to support the engagement of their teams in these uncertain times. Because many times we look at an engagement strategy that should line up to an HR strategy, that should line up to a business strategy. The reality is there's a business strategy with a people strategy, right? Leaders are really, really key in making sure that they bridge that gap. So if you're a business leader here, or you're an HR leader, right? A couple things to recommend is set a foundation for these leaders' success. Because I'm sorry, I feel bad for leaders because they're typically the face of antiquated HR practices, right? You give people a rating or an appraisal once a year, or here's an employee survey. We're going to give you data, once a year only. That's 3 months stale. But again, we're not really setting a good foundation for their success. And you can enable them in different ways, right? Whether that's through process, whether that's through technology, if you're large enough to purchase this type of stuff. But it's a really important thing to think about. And the examples I talk about when I say, set a foundation, think about performance management, right? Are people, your leaders or, HR, the company expecting a conversation once a year to talk about the goals? Well, we just talked about it earlier, right? It's not setting a right foundation for more communication, alignment. It's not very engaging to check in every once a year on those things. We talked about employee voice, right? Are you continually understanding the employee experiences, especially navigating through what's happening in a remote work environment, being agile of that information? So, I really urge organizations to look at their leaders because think about it one way. Your company has a direction and a strategic narrative that they want to follow. And the employees, they actually conduct all the behaviors every single day. But without leaders to make sure that connection is there, the bridge is there, communication is happening, the whole system falls apart. So leaders are so critical. If you are a leader, you can use a lot of these concepts. If you're an HR or business leader, how do you enable them to be successful? So the 5 major components I mentioned, over communicate, continuous feedback structure, EQ is larger and more important than IQ, use consumer principles, and leaders are your second secret weapon, right? Now, what I wanted to do to kind of wrap it up before questions, this is where I take my quick water break so that I can continue to talk for another 10 minutes, is I wanted to leave people with where you start. And I want to talk about 4 mindsets that I think are really important as you embark on this world of really trying to focus on engagement. The first, trust your employees, period. I'm kind of overwhelmed at seeing the data of how much technology that's being purchased, and it's moving up and up where we're monitoring employees, making sure that they're on their computer. I have people that I know personally that have to have a camera on all day to make sure they're sitting at their desk. The reality is trust your employees. So what I'd love you to do is if you get a calculator and just write how many employees you have in your company. And then I want you to multiply that by 35,000. So I'll give you a second. Take how many employees you have and multiply that by 35,000. You're going to end up with a number. And that number, reason why I have 35,000 is employees or human beings make 35,000 decisions a day. So whatever number that you have, they're making that many decisions anyways. Who cares if they're not in an office, right? You have to trust them, right? They're going to make decisions in the office, outside the office, right? It's really critical to make sure they have the ability to be able to feel trusted, the psychological health and safety around it. So build a culture of trust and confidence, right? It sets a foundation that's required in this open relationship between you and employees. And I always say you're either building trust or you're eroding it. There's no in between. And I'm thinking, at my last company, we talk about trusting people, treating them like adults. This is what our employee handbook was. It was one side of a business card. We're not going to give you policies on like what you should and shouldn't do. This is what the handbook says, right? Use your common sense, have respect for others, grow professionally and personally, and create value and treat our shareholders' assets as if they were your own. Right? So in this trust concept, again, we have to really trust our employees and build that safety. Second, actions speak louder than words, right? You know that idea, do as I say, not as I do, right? Employees are watching. You're setting the example. If you're telling people it's not safe to go in the office and you're there every day messaging them, right? You promote what you tolerate, especially if you're the one conducting those behaviors. Third mindset, lean on your community, right? I'm part of a wonderful HR community. It's called the People Group. I have no affiliation other than I get a lot of value at it. But when I need help in something that's happening in these uncertain remote times, I shoot over messages to this group. I get a lot of great ideas. Are there other communities, right, that you can support or that can support you? And the last mindset I want to identify was don't forget that your success starts with employees. Remember this group from earlier? And what I mean by that is, I always talk about the concept of the service profit chain. So for example, if your employees are conducting the right behaviors, your customers are going to be happy, they're going to be repeat buyers, they're going to refer others, and then you're going to see shareholder value, and that's going to grow. Now, the reality is, though, is customer success and your satisfaction and your shareholder value, those are just outputs. You actually can't fundamentally change those tomorrow, but what you can impact are the inputs, the behaviors, right? The actual, the products that your employees build, the services they provide. So cutting into that mindset that we can impact success in the company on where it starts, the inputs, again, it's a really good mindset to put you in the right frame to say we really need to focus on engagement of our employees, again, especially at these times. Now, those are the four, right? Where to start: trust, actions speak louder than words, lean on your community, and think employee first. But I want to end with one last item that'll take a minute. And the idea is just remember that not everything has changed. And what I mean by that is whether your employee is sitting at home, in an office, in a coffee shop, on the floor with their thumb up, whatever it is, employees are still the same. They still have intrinsic motivators. And I won't bore you with all the research that's out there on all the different types of companies that have done research on what makes a great leader. But I always love Isaac Newton's, comment: if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants, right? When you look at the giants out there, all the research, right? Whether it's Facebook, Gallup, YouGov, you name it, there's about 15 or 20 of them. When you connect all the things and all the research on what makes great concept and what great leaders do to engage their team, it usually boils down to 5 things, right? Support their career development, right? Leaders care about their employees, set expectations and build accountability, acknowledge and appreciate, right? And they listen, communicate, offer feedback. So you want to know what drives employee engagement. A lot of the concepts we talked about today is trying to navigate through those uncertain times, but let's not lose focus of, fundamentally what really matters. And how do you enable these in this new environment we find ourselves in? So finally, engaging your team is important during uncertain times, now more than ever. These are defining moments for you, right? As a company's an HR leader, getting out of this, coming out of it, again, people are going to move organizations, you may, other folks. Again, it's a defining moment for you in your career, but also think long term. Your workplace may not be the same or may never be the same. So these concepts, I think, are really important. So happy to take questions. What I'd love to do too is just reflect, right? My hope is you do something different next week. What's one thing? I can't see the chat, but maybe you can throw that in there and inspire some other folks. What's the expected impact this will have on folks, on your company, on your team? And my hope is you had some good takeaways today. And so appreciate everyone's attention. Happy to take any questions that came in through the chat.
Rob, thank you so much. And we'll leave this slide on there. So if anyone does want to reach out to Rob, his information is there. And Rob, I'll give you a little time at the end to just if there's any way that people can connect with you, because I think there are some super insightful things. I think just the topic of empathy and care by leaders just is so important at the end of the day, and what we all should continue to remember. So we did have several questions come through throughout the presentation. So I'm going to try to keep it in order a little bit. And I appreciate our team behind the scene is who's assisting me with that. So related to the topic of communication, I think the big question that I've been receiving is for managers who have historically communicated by email, what do you say to them, and how do you what's their best approach to kind of moving to different forms of communication?
Yeah, so I think those rules of engagement become really important. We talked about like if there's an alignment that whether this is organizationally, this is how it's going to work, or a team, and it's obviously if the manager's driving that team communication, that might be their preference. But especially if it's corporately, rules of engagement I think are really important. Here's how we communicate when there's an issue. Email is fine, but guess what? People are going to be focused between in the mornings and they're not checking email. That's the culture that we're going to build here. So I think when you create those rules of engagement, that's super important. And the other thing too is what I find is when I have had resistance to change, whether it's our organization or others, is everyone's changing right now. Like we have to embrace it in some capacity. And let's say your leader wants to, communicate by email, there's sacrifices that are being made by a lot of people, and following suit and leading by example is a good way to show that level of change.
And especially with emails, it often lacks that emotional intelligence you talk about. Any tips on how to improve email etiquette to communicate a message while showing empathy?
Oh wow, definitely not an email etiquette expert by any means, but I think some of those concepts of communication are really important, right? The context, the why. Sometimes when you're just thinking a comment and write it up there, you lose that context. But I also encourage people, and in my rules of engagement, is if you need a quick question, like type it in the chat. I'm going to see it versus 3 hours later, which I may not check my email, or pick up the phone, right? If it's the afternoon, pick up the phone. I'll answer it. You'll see on my Teams or whatever instant messenger that I'm on a call or not, whether I can answer. So again, from an email perspective, though, like you want it to be quick communication, but I'm said if it has to be quick, throw it through chat. If it's email etiquette, just give context. Make sure that people know what's, what really you need.
Yeah. Now, kind of switching topics, many organizations and teams out there have, weekly check-ins or huddles, as you mentioned. How do you make sure that huddles don't become redundant?
Yeah, so I always find too huddles are a living, breathing organism. So last company, we probably were on our 11th rendition. Worktango in the last 5 years, we're probably on our sixth or seventh rendition of what it is. So I think changing it is important. It doesn't always have to be static. Two, understanding employee sentiment. We ask every year, what should change with our communication rhythms? What do you find valuable in these? What don't you? The other thing I found that works really well is there's some things where you want to do like share wins and celebration, which are different all the time. There's the red flags, which give people value, where they can raise an issue and get in contact with someone right away, which might be challenging. One thing I found really works really well is we have each department come up every week to get 2 minutes in those actual items, and these are company wide ones where that's all you have 2 minutes. Share what's happening last week, what's happening this week, how you doing on your goals, anything you want to share. And what happens is now you're actually communicating, being transparent about all elements of the company, which I think builds alignment. So I think
Yeah.
if you do that and change the speaker, so it's not just one person, like even as simple as having a different host every month or something, I find that helps make it not redundant and keeps people's attention.
Now, I think many of us out there have gone to a virtual happy hour, a virtual social event. Any good examples of remote social events that anyone can do?
Oh my gosh. Well, first off, make them voluntary. I think the moment you start making things mandatory, it's a little challenging. You know, I was using the example earlier where if there's some way of creating creating that social conversation around, for example, we just gave you a budget to make your internal workplace better. Like, what is that? What did you choose and why? I find those are really interesting because there's value at the individual level. You have to learn a little more about your employees. But I've seen everything from healthy eating and wellness to those types of social things. You bring someone in to make a smoothie or cook healthy meals, and again, it's a little more focused on their wellness versus just a social event. And I've seen some companies that are larger. They're like, hey, we have a team that has a certain skill set, whether it's a comedy hour or a band together and that type of stuff. So you're getting entertained at the same time. I always say, like, as long as you can educate people, engage them, and inspire them, I think either if you have those three things in mind, that's typically what I find to be the most important.
On the topic of feedback and ongoing feedback, um, specifically for feedback structures, should there be a formal structure? Does it need to be tracked? Is Slack okay? There's obviously a couple thoughts in that question.
Yeah, right. So a couple of thoughts. One is I don't think it's bad for companies to mandate these types of conversations. I've been in companies that have mandated one-on-ones. It's an expectation for you as a leader in this organization, and it's what I mentioned, building a structure where communication can take place, right? So I think I think there's elements of conversation and social interaction that's important versus just the messages on Slack. Rules and engagement define when it's the right time to have those discussions. But again, I don't think it's poor to mandate these type of things. That being said, every leader is different, and that's having that empathy. Maybe you have 65 direct reports. That's not very reasonable in the course of a week or 2 weeks. So it's always kind of has an asterisk in terms of it depends on the certain environment. But Yeah, those are my just kind of thoughts on feedback in general. I think the other part too, and this is the business I'm in, is understanding from employees. Do you feel like you're getting great feedback? Is it frequent? Now you have a bit of a measurable understanding to see you're not trying to call out leaders, you're trying to inspire them, right? You're trying to give them the training that they would need to have better feedback conversations. So it just arms companies with a little more information to build the environment that is proven to provide, again, better engagement and better insights.
Now we have time for one last question, Rob. With a big team, how do you keep everyone involved and engaged? We've seen those commercials where people are fake being on Zoom. How can we avoid, that cardboard cutout or just the name standing in and not actually paying attention?
Yeah, it's I think when I talk about leaders are a big part of this equation, again, they have to be, right? If you're an HR leader, you can't handhold every employee, make sure they're all engaged, especially in this type of environment. So I think leaders and that expectation and their alignment on them, even some keeping them accountable and engagement metrics are ways to really make that possible. But in terms of, being on a Zoom call or making sure they're engaged in this type of world, you know, um, there's some rules of engagement I've seen companies do and say, listen, we're not sending IMs or things during these types of conversations. Um, Now, the challenge there is, I don't think you should force people to be on video. People may have concerns with that or anxiety around those items. I think that's where that empathy really has to come into play. And in this new environment, you have to kind of meet them where they are, right? So I think that there's a good balance between here are the rules of engagement, but there's flexibility in terms of how you feel today. I've seen one company have backgrounds in the back of their, to say whether they're green, yellow, or red in terms of how they feel that day. Like I'm a green, I'm good, but hey, I'm a red. Like I'm probably not going to be my best today, and no explanation needed, and that's okay here. So there's different elements of how you can engage people or give them a place where they can, if they choose not to be engaged, it's not disruptive.
I like that idea. Rob, thank you very much for your time today. 30 seconds. I just want to give to you. I know you help run and organize Innovate Work. Do you mind just explaining that to the audience, those sessions and how they can find out more?
Sure. Yeah. I suppose 3 years ago, I attend a lot of, events, whether it's in HR space or other ones. And I found that folks don't always have, especially in the smaller organizations, the budget or the time to go to a 3-day conference. So we created this Innovate Work, which was an evening to hear speakers, not talk for an hour like I did, but do these quick 9-minute, what I call HR Passion Series sessions. And HR folks come up, provide their thoughts in 9 minutes. I talk about in the time that you snooze, you put your snooze on, you could learn something. And there's a lot you can learn in 9 minutes. And it was a way to bring together the HR community, inspire them. And because of COVID, we stopped doing events in person, now do them online around the world. So it's a way to just really, wave the flag, bring the community together and engage, inspire them. There's a lot happening in the near future, but if there's any questions on that, or even just to reach out, like LinkedIn or my email there, happy to connect with other people. I'm super passionate about this.
I have Rob on LinkedIn. He's a great follow, great intel and content, technology, HR, everything in between. So highly recommend there. But Rob, thank you so much for participating today in our keynote speaker series. I think this information has been so valuable to everyone. I will say for all our participants who have registered for this event, the full link will be sent out after this presentation. So please stay tuned to that, and you'll be able to provide, share, listen to again on your own time. And if you did enjoy this presentation, please feel free to share as well. We want to continue to provide this valuable content throughout the year. So we are looking forward to our next event. And until then, I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and have a great afternoon.